Hello and welcome to Tisky Sour. Tonight is a very special edition because I'm joined by co-founder of Novara Media, Aaron Bastani. How's it going?
Good. But that's not the special reason.
I am also joined by the next Chancellor of the UK, John McDonnell.
Good to be here.
Thank you so much for finding time in what must be an incredibly busy schedule. I mean, how's the campaign treating you? Feeling energised? You feeling a bit knackered? A bit of both?
I love election campaigns. There's a sort of element of masochism in me that quite enjoys being up all hours, short nights, long days, that sort of thing. And it's brilliant. And you must have felt it. The enthusiasm out there is just unbelievable. And I'm turning up at meetings where you're getting hundreds of people, and they're just buzzing. They're absolutely buzzing. It's tough when the weather's foul. You're canvassing in the rain. Your cards are paper mache. You're frightening people on their doorsteps because it's so dark and things like that. But people are enjoying it.
It's one of those things, isn't it? Before the election is called, everyone's sort of like, "Oh, please don't have an election.
That's right.
I can't be bothered with it now. I've got things going on in my life. The weather's horrendous." And then the moment it is called, everyone is absolutely united. We're doing this. We're doing this as hard as we can. I love it as well, I have to say.
Well, I think the buzz is there. I really do.
You were up in Lancaster today announcing your latest policy in, I suppose, a splurge recently, laying out your vision of a socialism in Britain for the 21st century. This one is free, high-speed broadband for everyone, run by the state. I suppose it's fair to say this has opened up a bit of a new front with the establishment, with the press, with the opposition, with business, who are all questioning questioning whether this is a policy that they can support. Why have you decided that broadband was the next battle you were going to have?
Okay, look, take it in sequence. The whole thrust of our campaign is positive. Laura Pidcock, in one of the discussions we were having on strategy, she said, look, we've got to be sickeningly positive. We've just got to be positive about everything we do. Go out there, tell them you're going to change the world, and we're going to do it. And it's simple as that. And then you hit them every day with something positive in terms of, of course, ending austerity, but going beyond that. So it isn't just about ending the cuts. It's then say, right, let's move on about, we end the cuts, and then what do we do next in terms of just changing people's lives? That's what it's about, really. So we've been doing all the traditional stuff on national education service. Angie Rayner and Jeremy are out during the week. They launched the NES, go through it in detail. Absolutely inspiring, and we then went into, of course, we had to do the NHS. The most inspiring thing about that was just the nature of the way it was done. John Atterish and myself, we were just sitting down with junior doctors and paramedics and others and health campaigners. And the idealism you could almost feel within the room, and it was just terrific, So then we're trying to get the economic debate going seriously. Very difficult because the Tories are running their traditional campaign. Trying to focus it on Brexit, but then also immigration. It was like a rerun of every Tory election campaign you've ever seen. So we thought, how do we get into a real economic debate? But it's got to be about the real economy, what the future is going to be. How do you inspire people about that? And I think it was 3 years ago, I did a speech, soon after Jeremy appointed as Shadow Chancellor. I did a speech about where the economy needs to go in terms of artificial intelligence, new technology. That's where the jobs are going to come from. Fourth industrial revolution, we've got to be ahead of the game, and we're going to harness the fourth industrial revolution for our own ends, so, about redistribution of wealth and power, making sure that it's environmentally sound as well, all of those issues. Right? I did a speech then about new technology and where we go from here, the investment levels we want. I called it socialism with an iPad, which went down like a lead balloon. You can imagine that. Yeah. Well, there wasn't. I got all sort of criticism. Do you know where the iPad is made and the exploitation involved? Anyway, since then, we've been just working up the ideas, and I've been doing. If I go on too long, just shut me up.
You can never go on too
long.
No,
I mean it. Sometimes I don't rabbit on too much because I'm excited about all this. I've been touring around the country every other Saturday doing these town hall meetings where you invite local people in to talk about their local economy. It's absolutely knackering. Every other Saturday, my Treasury team are out there.
We should film some of those.
We have done, and they've been really good. Some of the short clips have been put up a while. Yanis, who does a lot of filming, has done quite a bit of those. We should actually, you're right, we should actually do more in terms of the longer discussions from them. But I mean, anyway, the idea is we go along and say, look, here's some statistics about your economy. But you tell us what it's really like. And then we say, here's our menu of policies we've been developing. Will it work here or won't it work here? And what will be your priorities? have you any other ideas? And so you're sort of writing the manifesto from the grassroots up. On every occasion, these are in small towns. It goes from Hastings to Mansfield to Blackpool to Pendle, you name it, we've been all over. Scotland, Wales, etc. Every time, it's always, the infrastructure here is falling apart. Rail, buses, but every one, they've said broadband. Speeds are appalling. Breaks down. 4 out of 5 people think the system doesn't work for them. And so, interesting enough as well, is often what you get is we live in a beautiful area, but we have to commute to work, distances, or we have to move away, or our kids have to move away. And interestingly enough, on one occasion, I went up to Colne Valley to Thelma Walker's constituency, and they said, how did you get out? I said, by train. And they said, was it delayed? Yes. Was it cancelled the second time? Yes. They said, that's classic. And I said, we'll show you our broadband speeds here, really appallingly slow. And so when we try and invite investors up here, they'll go through the same experience where the train must probably delay, the railway will let them down. And then startups here are almost impossible because of the broadband speeds. So that's where the broadband policy came from. We looked at how elsewhere, how connected we were in comparison with others. So we've got anything that's sort of 8 to 12% best in terms of fibre, full fibre connectivity. You look at South Korea, 97, 98%. Same with Japan. Look at Stockholm. The municipality is doing it there. Ireland, they're rolling it out in their rural areas under a state scheme. So the idea is we're not going to be able to deliver in terms of the new economy that we want, the high-skill, high-paid jobs, unless we get the foundation stone laid, and effectively one of those foundation stones is broadband. People talk about 5G, but actually 5G relates to broadband as well and isn't as reliable as the full fibre broadband that we want to put along, although it does relate to it. So we looked at what model we wanted. We actually explored what the government was doing, because there'd been a review of the new technology infrastructure. Look at the costings of what was needed, and what came out of that was basically to roll out high fibre, full fibre broadband right the way across the country, 20 billion. Government put up 5 billion, but they were going for this gigabyte system, which would rely upon the old cables, so it wasn't really good enough either. We looked at how it was done elsewhere. South Korea, what they did have a state investment, state company rolling it out. We looked at the way in which, what resources we had at the moment to do that. And there was OpenReach. Of the sort of 10% of what there is out there already, 8% of that was done by OpenReach. The rest was done by the other companies. So here was the ideal vehicle that we could use to do the full rollout if we got the investment in there. But if you're going to put that sort of money in, public money, well, the public should own it. They should be for the public benefit. The other issue that came up in the discussions was the discussion around equality of life in our society. So you look at different aspects of life, and you try and gauge how we've arrived at such an unequal society. And it is about income, poverty, it's about housing, it's about social care support, all of those issues. But actually also it is about what support you get right throughout your life in terms of connectivity too. So, libraries were invented because people wanted access to reading materials, culture, etc. This is the equivalent of libraries. All those kids out there, if you're in a relatively poor family, you won't have access to the internet like a middle-class kid. You must probably go to the library. Actually, the facilities aren't good because lots of libraries have been closed anyway. So you're in a race where you're falling behind already because you haven't got the equipment to be able to engage with education or culture generally. So lots of isolated elderly people now, again, cut off from their families and others. This is a useful tool. Facebook has become something used by older people much more than some of the younger people now. So we thought this is a fantastic opportunity, a limited amount of investment that's needed, do it through a publicly owned company so we all get the benefits properly, offer it as a free universal basic service, and on that basis, actually, you create the foundations of a new economy. And we looked at some of the research around that. One of the institutes that came forward with their assessment of what it will do on productivity, £59 billion gain. Just unbelievable opportunities there. And you then look about, if we are going to be globally competitive, if we don't do this now, we're just going to be fall behind. And we're going to be trapped in what the Tories are creating at the moment. Low wage, long hours, insecure economy, insecure jobs economy, basically. So this was a real breakthrough. And when we talked about it and thrashed around the ideas, we got some brilliant researchers, my two economic advisors, Rory McQueen and Max Harris, worked on it in detail. Max in particular focused on this area of work. And they just thrashed out, almost tested to destruction the ideas that come forward. Met with CW, sat down with them. What do you think? You represent the workers at the front end of this. Would this work? Wouldn't it work? What's the benefits for your workforce and the wider community? They did a hell of a lot of work on it. And we put the proposals together and thought, let's go with it. Announced it today. Of course you're going to get the backlash. Of course you are. Tories have gone ballistic. And I think they've quadrupled or at least the level of money that's supposed to be there. I said, actually, no, we're using your figures. The 20 billion came from government research that you commissioned. Some of the individual companies themselves, of course, have come at us as well with exaggerated figures. But, well, that's fair enough. Let's have the debate. It's forced the debate onto the table.
I mean, today you've been doing the media rounds with some media organisations that are quite hostile to this idea. Obviously, the idea of a free, publicly owned, high-speed broadband service is the kind of thing that we at Novara Media have, we're quite ideologically attuned to this particular policy. But I know that, there's been some quite outlandish opposition to it. Aaron, you've been collecting some of the wildest criticisms and the wildest critiques of a policy of free,
obviously
high-speed broadband.
the first thing that can come up, if Fox can get this up, is obviously the Evening Standard front page. So let's see if we can get that up. Yeah, so huge backlash at Labour's BT grab Evening Standard, obviously.
That's incredibly supportive for the Evening Standard.
I mean, obviously, we can get that. That's kind of obviously the polling we saw from YouGov. They asked two questions. Even the negative framing said 32% thought it was good, 31% opposed. But then the regular framing is, do you think businesses should have free, high-speed, full fibre internet? I think it's like 62%. I mean, what do you make of that sort of that dissonance between the front page of the Evening Standard and that polling? Do you think George Osborne genuinely thinks that most people think this is a bad idea, or is it something he thinks, oh God, this is a really good idea, and I want to sort of attack it as much as possible?
This is the reaction of vested interest, isn't it? No, this is the reaction of vested interest because we're challenging their vested interests. If the private sector system as it operates at the moment was so successful, why is it we've only got 10% in terms of rollout of full fibre? It's failed significantly. And at the same time, the average cost for people was identified as about £30 a month, £30.30 a month. But then if you fall out of contract, you get really hit hard with higher bills. So people are being ripped off at the same time.
You pay for a landline you never use.
Exactly.
It's a really odd system.
The whole system is weighted against you. So no wonder these people are going to squeal because we're actually exposing what their role has been. So failed in terms of making sure that we're sufficiently wired, but at the same time ripping people off. So no wonder they're going to squeal. They've made big profits. Chief exec. They said to me, one of the questions I got today is, these chief executives are on £1 million salaries and things like that. Will you continue to pay them? Well, the talent is out there. We're not going to be short of talent or anything like that. Are we going to replicate their system? No, we're not.
It's great.
Get some of your other ones.
Yeah,
you collected a few, no?
No, I have. I've got this one. This is a good take from, if we can get this one up, Danny Finkelstein. Danny the Fink. I thought we could bring together Labour's pledges and offer free broadband that only works 4 days a week. What do you think of that?
Oh, he's witty at times, but obviously not today.
I mean, what that's...
I like the 4-day week thing. Let's go through that one, shall we? Here we go. This is just classic Tory reaction, isn't it? And Tory press reaction. What I said at Labour Party conference about, since the 1860s, we've, as a labour movement, sought to reduce the working week. And the way that we've done that is that as workers, we create the wealth. So when we negotiate with employers about how that wealth is shared, some of it goes into wages, but workers themselves actually have prioritised free time. So that was the battle for the 8-hour day. And then right into the 30s and into the 40s, it's trade unions rather than legislation. It's trade unions rather than government. Trade unions have negotiated as they become more productive in work, as they create more wealth. They then say, actually, what we want to do is negotiate some of that because we want freer time. So, for example, holidays before in the 1930s. Let's have a week's holiday. Then after that, the reduction in the working week. And yes, other elements, sick pay, so the social wage. So we get to the 70s, and all of a sudden, that hits a brick wall, and that stops. So we're trapped in 42 hours, and it doesn't go any lower than that for quite a period. So all I said quite reasonably, I thought, is as we invest in our economy and grow it, and we become more productive, there's been a productivity crisis under the Tories because of lack of investment. So as we invest, we become more productive. How about the idea that we share out the rewards of that productivity more fairly? So higher wages, but also people might want to reduce their working week. And the idea is over a decade, we're talking about 10 years, to aim to reduce that to 32 hours a week, averaged out over the year. So there's that flexibility there. You'd think from the reaction of some of the media and the distortion of it that we were in a revolutionary situation. No, we're not. We're simply asking, let's do what we've done for the last century and a half, which is as we become more productive, share it more fairly. But some of that isn't just about wages, it is about hours worked. I always use this example. A couple of years ago, I went along to one of my local schools, and the kids there did their own play. It was about drugs, because they were learning about drugs and what's happening in society. And there was a young woman who was playing the child, and the young woman who was playing the mum, and another one for the dad. And they're telling off the child about going onto drugs and all the rest of it. And the youngster turns around and points to her parents and said, "You're not my parents. I never see you. We never sit down together. You only pass in the night." That's true. So in my area, where housing costs are so high in West London, I've got the airport who provides the jobs. Used to be really good wages at the airport, but actually they've been suppressed, so we've been running low-wage campaigns there. People work all hours God send just to keep a roof over their heads. So the mums and dads will be working, often different shifts, so they'll pass in the night. The family never actually gets the time to sit down together around the same table. It undermines social cohesion in that way. And one of our campaigns over there is about low pay, but it is about conditions of employment as well. And a lot of that is about long hours. We've got a long hours economy now. I just say it time and time again, we don't live to work, we work to live. And we've got to try and restore that principle.
Do you think that people like Danny Finkelstein and George Osborne would have opposed the weekend 100 years ago?
Well, they would have had long weekends. They would have most probably gone grouse shooting for most of August, wouldn't they? And seriously, they wouldn't have got up early in the morning, washed their shirts. They would have had staff to do that, wouldn't they? Yeah. So they would have had leisure time. Yeah. I think they live in a different world from all. And I don't. Let me just say this. People who have money or are born with money or whatever, I don't blame them for that. That's not, that's just what's happened to them. But those people who earn quite a bit or who've inherited quite a bit, I just say to them, have care when you're talking about the lives of people who don't earn as much as you. So that I don't expect empathy, but at least a bit of understanding. And people at the moment, there are a lot of families in my consideration, people are working all hours God send just to get by, and it's tough. And why not just aspire over a decade to reduce the working week? And I've said to them, we'll do it like the minimum wage, set up a working time commission so employers and unions get around the table and they work out and agree and negotiate when's the right time to start reducing that. And it will depend on the creativeness that we put into developing our economy, and that's what that investment is about today.
I mean, John Maynard Keynes was predicting in 1930, but that by 2030, 10 years from now, it would be a 20-hour week. So it's not particularly new. So
yours
thing.
is quite a conservative.
It's not particularly new, audacious.
John Maynard Keynes would have given us 20 hours.
I've become a centrist in my old age, obviously, haven't I?
Let's go on to billionaires in a moment. But first of all, you are watching Tysky Sour. You're watching Novara Media. As you know, this organisation is only possible because of your kind donations. If you are already a supporter, thank you very much. If not, please go to support.novaramedia.com and donate the equivalent of 1 hour's wage a month so we can continue working round the clock. I suppose at the moment we're happy to work for 7 days a week during an election, but only so in the long term we can work ultimately a 3-day week, I think, in maybe the third term. Billionaires. This has been, I suppose, the surprise theme, actually, of the first week of the election. Should we or should we not abolish billionaires? What's your take?
What we need to do is create a more equal society where you don't have the extremes of billionaires and at the same time people sleeping on the streets. It's as simple as that. We've got to create a society that's more equal. So it's not so much about abolishing, it's about creating a more equal society.
There's a phrase that people around AOC have been saying in America, which is that every billionaire is a policy failure.
Yeah, but can you remember in the Very British Coup by Chris Mullin, and when they filmed it, they asked the socialist prime minister, are you going to abolish first class? He said, no, they're all going to be first class. And that's what this is about. This is about creating the wealth so that wealth is more equally shared. So you haven't got these extremes. And the reason this is serious more than just, are you going to abolish billionaires? Richard Wilkinson, years ago, when he did his first book on health inequality, it was fundamentally important. There was a real breakthrough. And then he went on to, with Pickett, then to do the other work later on more broadly. But his first health analysis on inequality, it was in the 90s, then the early 2000s. I invited him down to the House of Commons to brief people. And he just demonstrated to me very, very clearly, the more unequal the society is, the more levels of crime, the more antisocial behaviour, the more lack of engagement in the political process. Actually, he was relating it to health as well. So the more unequal society, the greater the levels of morbidity on certain conditions as well. And that, I think, objectively, statistically, with fundamental research, you demonstrate what inequality actually does to a whole society. And I think that actually that debate needs to be had again. So I know sometimes you get in these interviews sort of trite questions about, billionaires or whatever, but actually the real issue is about the grotesque levels of inequality that we've got now. And that since austerity was introduced in 2010, just how bad it's got as well. The Tories throw at us about, the Gini coefficient hasn't moved at all. No, that isn't the measure that we want. We want to look at some of the other social metrics that goes on. 723 people died on our streets last year. How can you have those sort of extremes of wealth and poverty when they're dying on our streets? They're the sort of measures we need to do. Tony Benn always used to say on the news, they always bring on the last bit, which is about what's happened to shares. And he always used to say, why don't we at the end of that, instead of do the shares, how many houses were built this week, or how homelessness is at the moment, or what the levels of poverty are, or in the winter, how many pensioners are dying as a result of excess deaths, that sort of thing. I think that's the sort of debate we've got to have.
I mean, billionaires might present you, the moral argument is quite simple, I think, and quite simple to make, but the argument that will be made about your entering government is that billionaires will provide a challenge because your model for paying for many of these ambitious proposals is that you're going to tax the top 5% and especially the top 1% and especially the top 0.1%. And so the argument is that even if it's fair, even if it's moral and righteous to tax these people, they'll up sticks and leave, and then ultimately all those plans about revenue raising, collapse. So I mean, are you worried about them leaving? Yeah. If they talk about leaving, how do you stop them leaving? How does this all work?
I don't think it happens. Every time any Labour government, even new Labour, any Labour government is elected, you always have these stories about this. There'll be this mass migration of wealthy people. It never happens. It never happens. And also, there's an offer to people. I've been touring around the city, on this what they call the tea offensive. So I won't. There's no such thing as a free lunch. So I've been going around the city, meeting with asset managers and really wealthy people, actually. They don't want to step outside their office and step over a homeless person. They want to go home and feel safe. Actually, they don't want to live in gated communities, And actually, when there's an emergency, they do rely upon the NHS, not just their private schemes and BUPA and all that sort of thing. So I actually think most actually believe they want to live in the sort of society we want to create. And most of them actually are quite willing to pay the levels of taxation we're talking about to enable that to happen. So I don't think there will be this huge flight of the wealthy. The other thing as well is that I've been talking to quite a number of company chief execs as well and saying, look, this is the sort of things we're doing. You might like some, but you might dislike others, but it's going to happen anyway. Get used to it. And people have got used to it. You know, I've been talking to them in the city about financial transaction tax, a Tobin tax, that they don't like it. It's not massive or anything like that, but I just say it's going to happen, so get used to it, because actually that money will be able to provide us with the investment in skills, training and education that you've all been talking about you need in your companies. So there's always that shock horror, you know, there'll be mass migrate. There won't be.
I mean, I suppose you could say, I mean, they're obviously not that keen on these ideas, otherwise you wouldn't have this huge establishment counter-offensive at your being elected, but you think once you get there, they'll basically accept it because...
Well, what happens is it's all the smoke and fury of an election campaign, or every time we announce a policy that they don't like. But it's like anything else, a lot of it's huff and puff, and then they settle down, see the reality of it, and then... often either sign up, and then you'll find in a couple of years' time, like, you know, they'll tell you it was their idea in the first place.
I mean, also the reason why the media have responded in the way they have. Let's look at the papers in this country: Daily Telegraph, Sunday Telegraph, Spectator, owned by the Barclay brothers. They live on an island just off Sark in the Jersey Islands.
That's right.
Right? Hugely wealthy guys. They're non-doms. Lord Rothermere, 4th Viscount Rothermere, owns the Mail on Sunday, worth $1 billion. They're worth $8 billion, by the way. He's worth $1 billion. He's resident in France. Legally, he somehow inherited it from his father. Rupert Murdoch, he's worth $20 billion. You know, he founded, I think, News Group, whatever it's called now. They had to change the name. They restructured.
That's right.
There's News UK now, and they're UK holdings: Sunday Times, Sunday, Sun on Sunday. These are all billionaires. And so, like, that's 75% of the UK print media. We know that broadcast replicates the print agenda. Yeah. So it's a perfectly, you know, it's perfectly explicable the response that John's elicited with these policies.
The issue during a general election campaign is that, you know, we always argue that you know the media are legally obliged to give us some semblance of coverage, and that we get it, but it is a semblance because it's exactly as you just said. Particularly because of the cutbacks that there's been in the BBC over number of journalists and researchers, etc., is that actually the broadcast media will take their headlines from the press.
Do you think that's got worse?
Yes, it has. Yeah. And it has got, I tell you, I've been on picket lines outside the BBC. Jeremy and I set up the National Union Journalists Parliamentary Group. So over the years, we've been campaigning for resources in terms of BBC, broadcast, national, but also local papers as well. Local papers have virtually disappeared in many areas. So we've had campaign after campaign. I can remember being on picket lines outside the BBC. Well, Paul Mason was on one. We were out there, and that was about the cutbacks that were taking place. So as those broadcast organisations lose the number of journalists and researchers that they've got, they become more dependent on the press, and that press is extremely, it's not just biased, it just invents stuff. You know, it's just bizarre.
That's an interesting argument, actually, because people often say, I mean, quite rightly, when you know you're getting these attacks in opposition and during an election campaign, it's also going to be a huge challenge when you're in government having these attacks from the whole of the nation's press. So people talk, how are you going to reform the media? But I haven't really heard the argument that all you need to do is give the BBC a bit more money. Because if they've got a bit more money, they can be a bit more independent. They don't have to rely on the broadsheet press.
It's about resource. Most journalists want to do their job. I have a great respect for journalists, and I think it's an honourable tradition, honourable career. When we set up the NJ Parliamentary Group, part of it was about not just journalism in this country. We were campaigning about what was happening in terms of journalists being murdered in Russia. That was going on a number of cases then. On average, there's about 70 journalists a year that get killed globally. So journalists provide us with a fundamental public service that I think a healthy society needs. But as soon as you start eroding that, and the BBC is a good example, as soon as you start eroding the basic number of staff and therefore the ability to research and report effectively, then you're losing the quality of the product in itself. Then you become dependent upon replication of either press releases from political parties as well, or replication of what goes on in the media. And we know who, exactly as Aaron said, who owns the media.
I mean, just to be quick, I mean, for me, the paradigmatic example of that was how the Sunday papers, and by the way, the most read weekend newspaper in this country now is the Mail on Saturday. It's not any Sunday papers. They're seeing their circulations just fall. And you had, before the Mars show, you know, you had the news, they lead on that story, goes to the Mars show, You know, the first 3 papers, Sunday Telegraph, Mail on Sunday, Sun on Sunday, all with the same story coordinated. 4 days earlier, the political editor and the editor of the Daily Mail are seen walking into 10 Downing Street. Now, did they talk about that? We have no idea. Okay, but we can infer reasonably, you know. And like you say, I agree with you. And often when I've attacked the BBC about this stuff, and Rob Burley today was coming back at me, it's not, I'm not saying they're bad people. Like, there's clearly, like you say, it seems to me, Newsnight as well started to do a paper review in the last 18 months. Yeah. It's weird how broadcast is amplifying print media rather than being a counterweight to
you
it.
can see on Newsnight, that's filling time.
Yeah.
Because they've cut the staff. And there isn't that level of research, independent programming that goes on. So, what happens is, the media sort of swallows itself, so you start talking about each other. So you start doing reviews of the paper. Sometimes that's interesting, but not continuously, you know. The Mail is my favourite. It goes beyond anything you'd ever imagine years ago, really has. They did a story on me a few weeks ago, and I did this speech in Parliament, I think about 6 or 7 years ago, about housing in my area and about the development of buy-to-let landlords, which buy-to-let's fine, but actually buy-to-let landlords who actually don't maintain their properties. And I said, actually, in my street, about a third of my street have been taken up, and you can tell which are buy-to-lets and not managed properly. So what the Daily Mail did, they went and knocked on all my neighbours' doors. Jeez. Wow. But they mentioned my name. Of course, the neighbours all cooperated because they thought someone was canvassing on my behalf. So and then they ran a story. No, they aren't a third, mostly buy-to-lets, etc. Actually, they didn't do the assessment properly. Never mind. Within 3 days, they put photographs of my home. Right? Wow. Then the street itself. Within 3 days of that, we have a children's nursery at the top of the road with a huge white wall. 3 days within that was covered in swastikas, saying leave means leave, McDonnell out, and all the rest of it. Wow. That's the sort of stuff. In the last general election, the Mail, as you know, you may know, my wife's of Goan origin. She's born in Kenya, but she's a family in Goa. Her mum and dad have moved back to their traditional home in Goa. They've retired. They're in the late 80s. And the last general election, the Mail sent journalists and a photographer out to Goa to knock on their door. And of course, they're nice people. They just invite people in, come in for a cup of tea. And they sort of getting slowly interrogated about do I own properties in Goa? No, I don't. Anyway, they sussed it and just threw them out then very politely. But that's the level of injury. All of my family have had people parked outside their homes at some stage for weeks.
Has it made you a more suspicious person? Like if you meet a stranger, if someone wants to come in for a cup of tea, you start thinking maybe these people are Daily Mail journalists.
I try not to be, but you have to be careful. You have to be really careful, and I'm much more careful now what I say. I've dropped myself in the mire a number of times by rabbiting off at things and the occasional speeches, as you know. But you do have to be more careful about what you do. And for me, I'm not bothered because they can take me on whenever they want, and I'll respond accordingly. But it's when they affect your family that's the worst bit. That invasion of privacy on your family, but also when they make your family vulnerable. So pictures of my home, everyone knows my it's where I live anyway. But it's only 18 months ago, I wake up in the morning, I go out in the morning, there's a pile of turds on my doorstep. In the 80s, I had bottles broken in my children's sandpit and my windows put through. The one which was the most bizarre is someone poured maggots through my letterbox. And they must have been there hours because we woke up in the morning, there's this layer of maggots in the wall. I didn't even fish at the time. They were completely useless. But anyway, you just get used to it. But it's when they have a go at your family, that's the worst bit. And Jeremy, the way they've treated Jeremy has just been appalling, really. But what's good about it is that, when you're portrayed as almost having two heads in the media and then people meet you, well, not me, but they meet Jeremy and they realise he hasn't,
In general, I mean, a concern that many people have in this general election is that Jeremy's ratings are fairly poor. I mean, you can have whatever analysis of it that you like. But I mean, how do you see that being turned around before the 12th of December?
The key issue for us is, as I say, in that media coverage, at least you get some semblance, legally get some semblance of balanced coverage, but also you get more coverage. Naturally, you get more coverage. You get more opportunities of sitting down like this in different forms of media. We're trying to make sure that Jeremy now does as much of that as possible and that people just see what he's like. And then when people, you've met him enough times. When you see what he's like, people like him. He just comes across as a genuine nice bloke. But also he comes across as very principled, and I think he comes across as that sort of leader you want. You want someone... I think things have moved on so dramatically in our politics in terms of the experiences that people have had, that actually people want a leader who listens, who brings people together, who's calm and reassuring, but quite firm as well of their view, and has a history of being firm on the basis of their beliefs. And I think he's the ideal leader for our times, and I say that genuinely because that's the way I know him. So I think when he's on the media, in any form whatsoever, if he can get that across, I think we'll turn those ratings around. We did it last time, I think we'll do it this time. He's had much more of a battering since the last general election by the media itself, and you will get stuff on the doorstep. But then actually what happens then is people do see him on the sofa, on the breakfast TV and all that sort of, and they come by and think, actually, he's not a bad bloke, is he?
So another turning point in the last general election was the Manifestos. I like to say it was the fetish object of 2017. Everyone was like, this manifesto, it had almost magical qualities, that it was posited as turning around Labour's fortunes. And
I've never looked on Andrew Fisher as a fetish, but there you are.
Oh, that could be... Oh, you haven't? I think that would be a nice little breaking news there. Some gossip on Andrew Fisher live on Tisky Sarah. If anyone in the audience doesn't know, he's head of policy and author of that
does
manifesto.
The drafting of the manifesto. He brings it all together.
And tomorrow you've got your Clause 5 meeting, right? So that's when the manifesto is now drafted. It's now a written thing, and then
finalised as we speak.
The various stakeholders, people in the shadow cabinet, people in the unions, people in the PLP, they read through it
and the NEC,
and decide if they want to. And the NEC, they decided
they
want to keep it. There's been...
Well, we go through it line by line.
Line by line. How long does that take?
What happens is they come in the morning. Everyone comes in the morning. They sit down with their copy. Most of them have been involved in some element of drafting already because the policy had been developed that way. They'll have the opportunity for a few hours just to read it through, and also check anything that we'll have all our researchers and policy advisors.
Do you take away people's phones? So there's not a repeat of last year?
I don't think we did last time.
Well, you obviously didn't last time.
No, but it wasn't leaked from the clause. It wasn't leaked from the clause 5. It was leaked subsequently. I almost got the blame for that as well. Everyone thought, oh, clever wheeze, McDonald's leaked it to get the media.
It did work out well.
It did. That's what I said next time. No, I didn't. But what happens is you have a couple of hours which you can go through it, and also you've got the policy advisors there to test anything, check anything, and then we formally meet and we go through it line by line. And people will say, look, I think this doesn't go far enough, or I think there's a problem with this, and literally there and then we start amending. And there is an element of sort of negotiation, but last time, we went through pretty quickly last time, and it was, there's no rancour. What's interesting, there's no rancour. It's more about, will this work or won't it? Unions will obviously be there to represent their members and the broader agenda. The NEC members will be thinking as well as the just tactically as well about what they're coming back from their different areas of expertise and regions, etc. Will this be a flyer? Will it be an issue in our constituency, or will it be enough? And then at the end of the day, once we get to the end of the meeting, it's then signed off. Off it goes to print. There might be, sometimes at the end of the Clause 5, last year there was a couple of issues where we said, look, can we leave that to a further discussion? Because we know the parameters of that discussion. Can we leave it to John and Jeremy just sit down and go through it with them? That's what we did.
And so one of the big debates, I suppose, coming up to tomorrow, to that Clause 5 meeting, has been that there was, this year in particular, it was the first Labour Party conference, I think, where there were lots of policies that came from the conference floor. Yeah. And they really, in a way, shifted official policy to the left, or made it much more radical. So you've got the abolition of private schools, you've got defending and extending freedom of movement, you've got zero carbon emissions by 2030. Yeah. Very radical proposals, and there's been speculation as to which of these are going to make it into the manifesto. So I don't know what your thoughts are in terms of how the party should deal with that, if it sees any of these as a tactical mistake, or if it has to just say, well, it was passed on the conference floor, so it's going to have to be in the manifesto.
There's always a debate about, one, how far we can go within a period of office, 5 years, how far you can get there. There's always a debate about what's pragmatic in this, what's practical about being able to do, but what you want to do is try and install as much as you can from the conference policies into that. And that'll be the debate tomorrow. And you'll see it. I think if it goes through as it is, from the bits I've seen, I think it will be pretty radical and reflect a lot of what went through conference. But it's always about I'm a bit of, I get accused of being a bureaucrat, which I am, to be honest. I'm quite proud of it. But it's all about, a lot of it is about the sequencing of implementation and how you can get to different plateaus of policy making that you can then leap a bit further on. But it's not horse trading, it'll be a genuine political debate. Last time, it was over fairly quickly. There was a couple of key issues. There was a discussion about tuition fees. And do you really want to go this whole hog on tuition fees? We said, actually, we do. And there was a really good debate about, is this practical? Is it pragmatic? Yes, it is. But actually, it's more fundamental than that. This idea, I always say, education and gift from one generation to another, not a commodity to be bought and sold. Establish that principle. And that's how now we've gone into the National Education Service. Under that principle, there was a genuine discussion. Should we apply the same principles from the NHS into education? Of course we should. And that revolver. Universal basic services, I wish we could find a different term for them so people are clear about what they are. There's a big debate about universal basic services, how we extend them. So today the broadband was a universal basic service. Can we go any further on this at this stage in the first term for Labour government? Some of it, do you have to do it in the second term when you've won the argument a bit more, or when you've been able to create the growth in the economy that we want? Big debate that we'll have this year. Will bound to be, as with the IFS again. The IFS never accepts that as the multiplier effect of the investment that we put into the economy. So again, the debate is how much of a multiplier effect are we going to get for the scale of investment we're putting in? Last time we had the row with the IFS because it's bizarre. I thought they were large and Keynesians and they'd understand this more effectively. The scale of investment we're putting in this time, they've got to accept will have a multiplier effect in our economy overall. So it's those sorts of discussions that we'll have in some detail.
I'm just going to go to questions from the audience in a moment, but first of all...
Yeah. Well, with this one, with the EBS of full fibre, it would obviously have a multiplier effect. Let's not even talk about the things about regional inequality, reducing carbon footprint, etc., etc.
Productivity is going to be staggering, Chris.
So that's basically it. So I was going to say it would have a multiplier effect. It would obviously... just purely from, boosting final demand, great. Productivity perspective, great. Is there a part of you that thinks the Financial Times should get behind Labour and back us ahead of the general election?
It's interesting because the FT, when they did their analysis of some of our public ownership proposal, like on water, they came as near as damn it to supporting the policy. They did an exposure on water, which completely echoed everything that we've said. What a poor privatisation it was and how people were being ripped off and the levels of investment that hadn't gone on and the way that they'd loaded the companies with debt, even though they were privatised without any debt. So it's interesting. The FT at times have given us actually an element of fair reportage, which I'm quite pleased with. They've got the hump today. A bit because we didn't give them the broadband in advance, and we did to the BBC because we wanted to get the films sorted out in advance rather than have the rush around on the day. So I did an interview at Laura Kearnsberg that was embargoed and then went on the 10 o'clock news. So the FT have got a bit of the hump with us. And why don't you give it to us as well? So if they recommend against voting Labour in this election,
now we know why.
Blame me.
We've got our first question. It's a really good one. Ben J. Banjo asks, can we get an easy, concise version of the manifesto for those out on the doorstep?
Yes. There will be, first of all, there will be a summary of the policies. That's the first thing. Secondly, we're looking at how we can use film and social media, etc., to get that out there. That'll happen. The manifesto is quite broad. So there'll be also some of the policies that are flagged up in the manifesto. They'll be spelt out in more detail in policy statements in the run-up to the actual election day itself, so that people have those as well.
Do you worry? So I'm very confident that the manifesto that comes out is going to be, a vision that makes Britain much better than it already is and than it's been in a very long time. I suppose the one concern that some people might have, and I think is a real one, is that as the manifesto's got more radical, it's become slightly more complicated, and it's a bit harder to explain. Yeah. So there was something about the 2017 manifesto which was all scrap tuition fees. I get that. We'll build a lot of council homes. I get that. When it comes to inclusive ownership funds, when it comes to sort of bringing in new sectors of the economy into universal basic services, it gets, and especially when it comes to these big numbers in these investment funds, when we're talking about 250 billion here, 250 billion there, it can get quite complicated. So I suppose there will be lots of people watching who are saying, I'm going on the doorstep and I want to know what's the story. Yeah. How do I get across what the point of this manifesto is and how it's going to change people's lives?
Look at what happened in Australia. The Labour Party there had a great conference. They had a multiplicity of policies, which were great. Couldn't disagree with them. They were very supportive of them. They then go to an election, and they couldn't narrow it down to basic themes, and they lost because they were up against an opponent that just hammered a couple of individual messages. What we've got to do is be a bit more sophisticated than that in terms of have a broad manifesto that people will be interested in all different aspects, whether it ranges from investment in our economy right the way across to animal rights, to the green industrial revolution, all that, so people can actually seize upon those areas that they're interested in. But it is then boiling it down to a few key issues and a few key messages. But like the policy today, free broadband, it just symbolised everything we're about. So it isn't just about making the statement that we're in favour of universal basic services. It's actually saying this is an absolute concrete example of what we're all about, the sort of society and economy we want to create. And that, I'm hoping tonight that people who've had any engagement whatsoever in the news or the media today will go to bed thinking, actually, free broadband, that's what Labour Party came up with. Think about it, or might be discussing it in the pub, or might be around the dinner table tonight with their family. We put it on the agenda. And what we've also done is we've just got a serious debate going again, rather than just sort of bluster and bravado that we've had from Boris Johnson, How many times can he be seen in a white coat in a hospital, It's extraordinary.
Do you think he can do that for the next 4 weeks?
I don't think he can. I think it's not working now. I think the rambling speeches with bizarre language of onanism and all the rest of it, there's only so much you can take, I looked, Simon Fletcher, who headed up Ken Livingstone's office and was involved in the election campaigns between Ken and Boris. He basically did a note for us and said this is the sort of thing he'll do. He will not engage in a debate apart from his own terms. He'll never answer a question. He'll always interrupt and be quite rude about it as well. He'll bluster and huff and puff, and he'll keep smiling, etc. And he said you just have to try and find a mechanism to cut through that. And I think the way you do cut through is just, actually, it is about having a serious debate. Just saying, look, this is the reality of the world. The real world is intruding on people's lives, and that's where we're at. Go and play your games. Let us as grown-ups get on with dealing with the real issues. And I think that's the sort of cut-through we're getting as we announce individual policies. NHS the other day. How he tours around he stopped going to hospitals because they're booing him as they go there. People are turning up and demonstrating. Hillingdon Hospital, which is my hospital, is his hospital. He's my next-door neighbour in terms of constituencies now. They've just closed the children's wards because they're unsafe, because of lack of investment. We've been campaigning. His predecessor was a local Conservative MP. He lived in the community. Actually, he was really respected. A good traditional constituency MP who worked hard on behalf of his constituents. We'd been campaigning together on a cross-party basis to get investment in the hospital and build a new hospital. For a decade we've been doing that. Tories wouldn't budge. Now the children's wards are closed, they're unsafe. What does Boris Johnson do? Turns up for a photo call. That's it. I think people have had enough of that. That's why Ali Milani, I think, stands a good chance of taking the seat this time round.
I've got a question that I like reading these ones out. One, because it's got a personal experience in it. And two, it's got a phrase and an acronym I don't understand. So I like taking the risk of reading it out, given that I don't know what it means. Dear. But this is from John. As a proud socialist, so this is from Jarrow R's 1976. As a proud socialist, but also a fibre planning manager for an altnet rolling out FTTH. I'm not sure what an FTTH is, but the question will make sense either way. I'm conflicted. What's your answer to inevitable skills surplus and job losses in the telecoms industry?
Right. Okay. From what we're doing in terms of our plans at the moment, 10-year programme of quite intensive work if we're going to succeed in that 10 years. So all the jobs that we've got at the moment we'll desperately need, and we'll most probably have to expand that in that programme itself. But remember, what we've built into our National Education Service is, first of all, the ability to have free education from cradle to grave. And that means a lot more investment in Effie and skills training as well. So as a particular skill within the tech sector is developed and used and may be required, you're always able to update those skills and move on. Now, what we're putting in place over this decade is full fibre network. And people are saying, well, actually, it might develop on that 10 years. Actually, I think it will most probably be the most stable thing that we'll have for quite a long period. But we're also putting a lot of money into research and development, and that will enable new developments to take place. But alongside that, you're training people in the skills for those new developments. So I think it is just a matter of keeping pace rather than just running on the spot. But he's right. You know, in areas where we're introducing new technology, there will be the development of skills for the long term, new jobs appearing, and we've got to keep pace with that. But also, I'm hoping that the use of new technology will help us to be more productive and therefore reduce the working week. And in that way, yes, you're not displacing people, you're just giving them the quality of life and work-life balance that we're all aspiring to.
There's a question, actually, and this relates to, I think, was it an Ian? There was some of the criticisms today were about, if you have free broadband, why not have free everything else? So this is
free water was one.
This relates to it. So Richard Margarison, I might have pronounced that incorrectly. Does John support the idea of subsidised or free at the point of use food in the future?
Right. You have to be realistic about what we're going to do in the first term of a Labour government, and you look at what the priorities are. The priorities for me is to make sure that we've got a productive economy where the wealth is shared more equally, and that we tackle the grotesque inequalities we've got. The reason that we're using broadband as a universal basic service in that way is because it does a number of things. It tackles the social inequalities. It tackles the issues around climate change, reduction of commuting, etc., and therefore taking carbon out of the equation for many people. But also what it does is, exactly as Aaron said, it stimulates the economy in such a way we become more productive. And in that way, the calculation of £59 billion worth of increase in the economy overall as a result of that productivity increase. In that way, we can use those resources then to pay for our public services, tackle inequality, etc. So you have to do this in what is realistic phases. Because I got asked a question today, if not broadband, why not water? Well, actually, we said we're bringing water back into public ownership, and we will reduce bills as a result of that, and we'll be able to harness that public utility much more effectively in tackling climate change too. So it's just a matter of how you stage these things.
No, I was going to say there's a few things. Firstly, food is a more rivalrous good than the internet. So anybody right now, click, if you're using an iMac or a MacBook, go to that little logo at the top, which is your Wi-Fi network. Look at how many networks are available, right? The point is you're excluded from that. In economics, that's called excludability. So the way that you access these things, that abundance is already there, but it's gated in a way because we live under capitalist social relations. So that's already there, right? But it's being closed off. So that's a very different way of accessing something than to food, which is incredibly rivalrous. If I have a burger and John wants the burger and I want the burger, we either share it or one of us eats it, but we can't both have the one burger each. It's a very different good. And then secondly, the cost of entry to building a national full fibre infrastructure are tens of billions of pounds. The cost of entry to creating food are quite low. So who can afford to do that generally for high cost of entry? It's either a state or it's a monopolistic multinational, right, which tend not to be particularly transparent, which tend to engage in tax avoidance in the case, for instance, of an Amazon or a Google, for instance. So I think the argument's very, very different. The idea that this is like food is a weak one. And obviously, like John said, it's this is a natural monopoly.
But there's different solutions, isn't there, for everything, which is the issue at the moment is that we have a government at the moment that can't feed its population, can't house its population, can't even keep them safe. So how do you tackle them? Well, the way in which you tackle the issue of making sure people can put food on the table is making sure they earn a living wage. So there's different solutions. So rather than providing food free, it's making sure that you have people earning enough in work, or if they're out of work, having this appropriate safety net so they can afford food.
I'm going to end with a comment and a question that's being asked by many. So the comment is from our very own Max Shanley. Not a question, but I just want to thank John for helping me get an education. You helped change my life for the better, mate. I can't wait for you to transform the lives of our class for the better too.
He's a star, Max. He's such a great activist and thinker as well. And he's done really good work in bringing others together just to think through some of the issues we have to face.
And you can find his podcast, All the Best, on our website. And the final question, which is being asked by a lot of people, how do we get Sajid Javid to debate you?
That's a good point, actually. That's a very good point. Last week, he did this big bravado thing. I'll debate John McDonnell wherever. We said, well, yeah, we know, because we've already asked you. And then when we were fixing up, it was meant to be this Sunday, it was Channel 4, and they came back and just said, look, he's putting all these different obstacles in the way. So they didn't. We said, well, is it off? They said, well, shall we say it's postponed? I said, okay, go back to them and say it's postponed, but just get on with it now. And it's interesting. I don't know what I don't get. I'm trying to be nice like Jeremy Corbyn and not get personal about this. Okay, I keep telling people I'm on the Jeremy Corbyn niceness course, but I keep getting halfway and sent back again to the beginning, that sort of thing. So I have to be careful. But with Sajid Javid, look at the debates in Parliament. I just, some of the stuff I don't mind. Philip Hammond actually as the Chancellor, and Osborne before him, they'd have a bit of knockabout, but actually you would get to a discussion about an element of the intellectual roots of their economic policy, and you would get a discussion about some of the detail of that economic policy. So at least you're engaged in the debate. That doesn't happen at Sajid Javid. What happens is you just repeat the Tory headquarters script time and time again. And I think that's why he doesn't want the debate itself, because I think actually we could expose his exaggeration and of distortion of our own policies, but we could get to the roots as well of some of the fundamental elements of the Tory policy over the last, generation really. What he didn't like in the last parliamentary debate is that he was going on about Labour's crisis. And I thought, I'm not having this. This was a banker's crash. You're a director at Deutsche Bank. You were selling the CDOs, which were seen as the weapons of mass destruction that brought about that crash. So I said, I'm not having that. So we just quietened him down a bit, and he sort of slunk off.
And you've said Channel 4 was saying he was putting lots of conditions in front of it. Can you say unambiguously you will debate Sajid Javid any time, any place, any format? We've
said that time and time again. We've said it so often. And again, I said it with Osborne, I said it with Hammond as well. This is my third Chancellor I've been on. So yeah, we've said that time and time again.
What conditions was he sort of stipulating?
Don't know. My Commons officer was basically pushing and say, look, can we have that date? Can we get it sorted out now? And Channel 4 don't go into details. They said that it's been too difficult.
Right.
So they've said, we said, is it off? They said, well, shall we say it's postponed? I said, yeah, let us know the date and we'll sort it out. There's always lots of negotiations around these things, but I said to Andy Whitaker, who's our comms officer, don't put any conditions down whatsoever, just say let's have that discussion,
Come do it on Novara Media, Sajid.
Yeah, why not? Why not?
Well, it wouldn't exactly be neutral territory.
I mean, if he said no to Shadow, he's probably not going to say yes to that one. John McDonnell, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Keep fighting a good fight.
Pleasure.
And we're all rooting for you over the next 4 weeks. Aaron Bastani, always a pleasure.
My pleasure.
Thank you for watching this evening. We've hit 2K. We want to keep doing these shows more and more often, get more big names in before the general election to make that happen. Please go to support.novaramedia.com and donate the equivalent of 1 hour's wage a month, or if you already do, as well as saying thank you very much, maybe give us a little election bonus or something like that. Is that fair? I think that seems fair. Good night.